How the Universe Works, Evolution. Now we're coming to the end of our three-part series on how the universe works. Interestingly enough, the universe itself does evolve. Now, based off my meditative experiences, there have been at least 3 prior incarnations of the universe as we know it. Now, what those were like and what that entailed, we'll be getting to in a minute. But it's important to remember that when you're talking about how the universe works, first we've addressed the issue of the path of enlightenment, how you take the disparate or individual pieces of reality and combine them back together to reach this undifferentiated whole. Now, outside of that, we also talked about the path of manifestation, where you take this undifferentiated whole and make it into little individual pieces so you can express individual ideas and concepts. But why is this happening? Well, it turns out the universe does in fact evolve, and it's this continual cycle of recreating undifferentiated reality and going back down into manifestation over and over and over again. Now, of course, this happens over a very long period of time. I mean, far longer than any one individual lifetime. Now, how does this work? It happens as a result of the collective development of everything in the universe over a very long period of time. So, because of this, this is why human beings, amongst other things, incarnate, because they're part of that process of evolution that impacts the entire universe. So this is a pretty curious thing, because when you talk to people who have awareness of past lives or of the process of incarnating, sometimes they'll talk about how they clearly incarnated here in the here and now because they wanted to achieve something or experience something. That was part of their individual evolution, if you will. However, when you add all of this up and you combine it back together again, that undifferentiated whole that we talk about in the enlightenment state actually changes a little bit. Pretty curious. Now, when it changes enough, the universe has to be remade. So that's an interesting thing to consider, is that your personal development is also part of everything else in the universe and results in a change in what that undifferentiated whole or enlightenment state or Godhead or Nirvana or True Tao or whatever else you want to call it is. Very, very interesting. So let's get on to number 3. At least 3 prior periods have existed. Now, I'll describe what some of these are like in a minute, but it's important to remember that when reality changes enough, the rules that originally applied don't work very well, or don't apply anymore. So the thing that's really important to keep in mind when we're talking about these prior incarnations of the universe is that, quite literally, the laws of physics weren't the same. We'll get to some examples of that in a moment. These are places where a modern human mind literally could not exist, because we're designed for this universe, not what came previously. Now, if you're familiar with the works of one John Michael Greer, who wrote a book called Circles of Power, amongst many others, one of the things he described in there is that occasionally you can come across what they call a shard, or an incongruent piece of reality that was left over from this prior form of reality. Whether these things are evil or not isn't really a valid question. What they are, however, is completely destructive to a modern human being, much in the way of placing your physical body inside the center of a star would be. It's simply not compatible with our level of reality. What's interesting about this is these things can be encountered to a limited degree upon the astral, because again, the astral is a timeless place. But the interactions with this stuff are generally counterproductive to the individual involved. For those of you familiar with the Cthulhu series, okay, you're familiar with that. Well, the Cthulhu series by H.P. Lovecraft quite possibly describes what happens to a human being in terms of H.P. Lovecraft's personal life when they accidentally project their mind into one of these spaces. You know, H.P. Lovecraft was mentally ill and ended up dying quite early because of that experience. To a degree, the description of the Conan tales could be another example of this. Because here's the thing, is that most people who encounter these things do it accidentally. A lot of times through drug use, but a lot of times they're just very gifted in a psychic kind of sense, and they don't have much training, which means when they encounter things like this, it can be quite corrosive and damaging to them over time. So this is the key point to keep in mind. These prior incarnations of the universe, the laws of physics were different. And however they were structured, they were not designed for a human being as we know human beings to exist. So because of that, exposure to these things, to the degree it's possible, is quite corrosive. And keep in mind all the stories that you hear about occasionally. Someone will be mining someplace and they'll drill down several thousand feet and find some weird artifact. Well, what usually gets left out of the story is if people have routine contact with those artifacts, they tend to end up going crazy or dying. A lot of the early stories about Egyptology could probably provide some interesting parallels as well. All right, so now we're getting to the part where a lot of people are excited about to go, okay, what were these places or these incarnations of reality like? Well, I've had the occasional interaction with these things over my 30-year meditative career. And I've spoken to various teachers about this, and none of us can seem to come up with a good reason why this happened or even what it means. What I will tell you is I basically saw 2 of at least 3 prior incarnations. Now, the incarnation prior to the one that we live in right now, if you're familiar with Michael Moorcock's Eric of Melnibone series, in many ways looked remarkably like that. It was a place that was ruled by mostly non-human entities who were humanoid in shape. Human beings were definitely further down the pecking order, and these entities were magically empowered in a way that they ended up destroying their own universe. Now, viewing that incarnation of reality was uncomfortable. Not just because of what I saw there, but the physics weren't the same. So squeezing my mind into that space in order to perceive what was going on was physically uncomfortable. And while sometimes it was interesting, it was often kind of graphic and disturbing, and more than anything, it just hurt to do. Now, okay, that's interesting enough. The incarnation prior to that I saw was really disturbing. It physically hurt to look at it. Because, again, whether it had 5 dimensions or 3 or 4 or whatever, how we're physically structured, mentally how our minds are built, wasn't designed for being in that space. It was interesting in that it was largely populated by these gigantic creatures, almost fish-like. It felt like everything was swimming through some kind of fluid. And it was this continual cycle of attacking and destruction and eating and consuming and fear, and literally it hurt my mind to perceive this at all. It was extremely damaging. Even now, thinking about it, I'm starting to get this weird kind of feedback headache. So again, it's not a region that we were designed to have any real interaction with. And again, these were highly magically empowered entities as far as I could tell, and they ended up destroying their universe once again. What happened before that, I'm not too sure about, but based off the amount of discomfort it took me to go back just 2 cycles, I don't think I'd really want to even take a hard look at what happened before that. This brings us to our final point. It's very unclear when this happens again. Now, this whole Looney Tunes theory of the world is coming to an end happens over and over and over again. It's clearly imprinted in the human psyche. But hey, they had this in the year 1000, they had this in the year 2000. You've got the guys going on and on about how climate change is going to destroy everything, and before that it was nuclear war, and so on and so on and so on. While this Revelation's kind of in-time way of looking at the universe may ultimately be real in a certain sense, and that eventually this universe will come to an end and need to be remade once consciousness within it changes to a point where its current incarnation doesn't serve it very well. Nobody knows when the hell this is going to happen, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen anytime soon. So again, the whole end times thing, while in some regards may be ultimately true, in that the universe will die and be remade, the idea that this is happening on any kind of timeline that anybody can predict, let alone that it's going to happen anytime soon, is completely nonsensical. So keep that in mind when you read up on this kind of stuff. So if you like the topic of today's discussion, please give us a like down below and consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to learn more about the 60 Skills curriculum, go to the details portion of the video below. Otherwise, as per usual, train hard and be well.